All right, Zeus, let's go to the next topic here. You might be noticing something on screen. That's right, we actually have video on screen. Shocking, isn't it? If you're looking at the YouTube channel right now, I have a wheel, a spinning wheel here on from wheelofnames.com that has a bunch of topics to discuss our year in review of the gaming news this year. What's going to happen is I'm going to spin the wheel, and then me and Zero are going to discuss what happened with this said topic. Why don't we get started right now, Zero? Are you ready to spin that wheel?
Yeah, let's do it.
Dun 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 dun. Oh my god. Oh, okay, here we go. First topic that we're going to do in review. Square Enix sells studios. Around the beginning of the year, what happened is that Square Enix sold 3 key studios to Embracer Group. One was Crystal Dynamics, the other was Eidos Montreal, and the other was Square Enix Montreal, which turned into another named studio, which doesn't matter because they then closed the studio anyway.
Yep.
Okay, so now that we have that information, why don't we go ahead and talk about the topic at hand? What led to... Let me ask you this to start off. What led to Square Enix wanting to sell Eidos Montreal, Crystal Dynamics, and Square Enix Montreal?
I want to say that it was due to just the Western studios underperforming the metrics that Square Enix Japan wanted.
Yes.
Because for just many years, and I've gone at length about this, just Square Enix Japan's executives have always wanted the Square Enix Western studios to just make absolute gangbusters level sales for these games, and usually the games that they were trying to sell just simply weren't the mega hits that they were thinking them out to be. Last example I think I mentioned in that episode was the 2013 reboot of Tomb Raider.
Yeah. And
how they were hoping that the sales on that game would beat Call of Duty for that year. And it was just like, my reaction when I read that that quarterly financial report, I was just like, you guys have to be smoking something, because Tomb Raider fans are typically not Call of Duty fans. You're not going to find much crossover on it.
Yeah.
And of course, just the stock report or the financial report was like, yeah, this is a Western game from a big brand, so we have high hopes and high potentials for this. And I was just like, I don't know what you guys are thinking or smoking, but there's no way. There's just no way. And of course, financial quarter after the release of the Tomb Raider reboot happened, and then it was just like, yeah, so we are deeming Tomb Raider a failure because it didn't beat the sales numbers of Call of Duty. And it was just like, well, yeah, duh, because there's no crossover between those two brands. And then same thing for the Deus Ex game that came out. Just, hey, we're hoping that with this game being released that, it will beat sales numbers of the latest Call of Duty game. And Deus Ex was a single-player game. And it was just like, again, what are you guys thinking? And then, of course, next quarterly report, yeah, so Deus Ex is a failure because it didn't beat Call of Duty. It's just like, again, what are you guys thinking? And just a clear misunderstanding of just what their studio had. And then I want to say the former lead of Square Enix Montreal and Eidos Montreal recently had came out when we had covered this story, saying that he felt that the leadership at the Square Enix Western Studios was also really bad too.
Yeah.
I believe it was Stefan Distus. He had commented on it back when we originally reported it, and then when UMA, the renamed Square Enix Montreal studio behind the mobile games like Hitman Go and stuff like that, when their closure happened, I believe that a lot of game journalists ended up pinging him about it, going, hey, so one of the studios you founded completely folded on itself. what are your thoughts on it? And he kind of reiterated his thoughts from earlier this year, saying, I got nothing against the studio, but unfortunately, the management in that studio are pretty terrible, and they never changed after the purchase. And not really a surprise that they're being shut down. So sad to see it go, but I just think that poor management led that studio to die.
Like you said, they kept over projecting what their Western games would do. You mentioned Tomb Raider and Deus Ex. Just Cause was another. And this seemed to be something that I would say that Square Enix just kept on doing. And I think the catalyst to them finally selling the studios was what happened with Marvel's Avengers. Because Marvel's Avengers it was based on a Marvel property. Marvel is incredibly hot right now. And that game actually underperformed. That did not do very well. But it's also because people were not interested in the style of game that it was. And also it didn't turn out very well. That underperformed, which then led to Guardians of the Galaxy underperforming as well because the stink of Avengers. Which at that point, my guess is when Square Enix said, okay, these guys are incompetent, we got to get rid of them, which was not fair to that certain extent. Because first off, asking Crystal Dynamics to make an Avengers beat-em-up style, a live service beat-em-up game with the Avengers was like the absolute wrong studio to use that with. And Guardians of the Galaxy ended up getting fantastic reviews, but poor sales. And the poor sales essentially meant to Square Enix that, oh, okay, well then we're done with the studio because they can't do anything right to us. Which led them to sell off those 3 studios for a paltry sum of $300 million to Embracer Group. That's a fire sale. That is like, we need to get rid of these assets right now. Which I was stunned by when this happened. Because say what you will about Marvel's Avengers, okay? I will say that game is not very good. But Crystal Dynamics, and I would say, I think it was Eidos Montreal, and Eidos Montreal, are very good studios that make really good games. I mean, you could have gotten double that pretty easily, but they gave Embracer a sweetheart deal to get those 3 studios. And yeah, they ended up closing the Square Enix Montreal studio, but you still have 2 really good studios with some very good IP that people want to see games for, including Legacy of Kain, which Embracer and Crystal Dynamics have already said, yeah, we're doing it, don't worry. It's like, we are doing it. What do you think led them to actually sell the studios off? Like, what was the catalyst? Was it the quality of the games they were turning out, or was it something else?
I will say that I probably agree with you that the straw that broke the camel's back was likely the Marvel's Avengers game.
Yeah.
Because just there was so much marketing hype on that one. I remember it was almost kind of like a weekly or almost monthly blitz of, oh, get excited, it's going to be good, it's going to be good, it's going to be good. And then the moment things started to turn sour was right before release, when they had announced, hey, so by the way, we're going to do a partnership with Sony. So Spider-Man is going to be exclusively locked to PlayStation. And that was when you had people really sour out going, well, this stinks. I play on PC and I wanted to play Spider-Man. And now you're telling me I can't play Spider-Man? Okay, fuck this. I'm going to cancel my pre-order on Steam. And same for people on Xbox. Oh, Spider-Man's limited to PlayStation? I don't have interest in getting a PS4 or PS5, so fuck that. Return to my pre-order. So that was one thing that happened. And then the launch was disastrous because a lot of people were just like, hey, this game isn't really balanced correctly. And then I want to say it was about 1 month in when people started getting to endgame. People had said, wow, I don't know who set up the loot tables on this. They're fucking awful. How can I get worse gear by opening a loot chest after completing an endgame event. This is bullshit. And, just the grind is no longer fun. Finally, all the complaints came to a head that they had to put out sort of like a state of the game sort of messaging, saying, "Hey, we hear your complaints. We're working on them. Sorry, we'll get things fixed. Don't worry about it. Please, 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 dear God, be patient with us. We will get things fixed. And dear God, just please, please, please forgive us." And so you had that going on too. It was just a grand shitstorm. Just so many things sort of dominoing out. And honestly, just I don't blame the players for getting mad, because I mean, with a live service game, the last thing you want to tell your players is, "Hey, you're playing the game wrong. Just shut up and everything will be fine," which was what they did for the beginning of the Marvel's Avengers game. And then, of course, all this bad PR was leading to just additionally a lack of return on the financial side for the microtransaction store. And I think just when you had the initial sales of the game being down and then no return sales happening on the microtransaction store, that was probably when Square Enix was just like, "Hey, we gotta get rid of the studio. The studio is now just dead weight to us. We've overinvested on this. We paid likely a heavy license for the Marvel IP for games and stuff like that. We got to get rid of this. Just toss it out the airlock and shut the door. We got to get rid of the studio." And again, I'm also in agreement with you that it was totally unfair, because this sort of baggage also put a lot of skepticism on the Guardians of the Galaxy game by Crystal Dynamics. That one was a really good game. I played it last year and I thought it was a lot of fun. I'm not the biggest comic fan. I'm not someone who follows the comic universe just to a T. I'm definitely not a big Marvel Cinematic Universe person either. I like some of the movies enough, but I'm not one who's like following every single little thing that the movies are doing. But yeah, I really thought that the Guardians of the Galaxy game was a lot of fun, and it was a real bummer because of the fact that just because of the poor reputation that the Marvel's Avengers game got, it sort of put the Guardians of the Galaxy game under this humongous shadow of, yeah, you should be skeptical of games being produced by Crystal Dynamics because they could be complete fucking duds. And unfortunately, this was a game that was much more fun and had just a great vibe and everything, but due to the poor reputation that Marvel's Avengers got, it just built up this big shadow of be very, very, very careful of what the studio is selling. And I think that ended up just being one of those sorts of things that just left people really, really leery to drop money on the Guardians of the Galaxy game. And because of that, the Guardians of the Galaxy game undersold. Granted, I think it's now become sort of like a cult classic sort of hit now, because everyone's just like, oh yeah, you know, that the Guardians of the Galaxy game was actually pretty damn good. So yeah, you should pick it up. And unfortunately, for the bean counters and everything, by the time it became a cult classic, it was too little too late.
Yeah, the Avengers really did it because of how much money they spent on it and what little they got in return. But we also need to put in one thing that was going on too at the time when they sold this, and that is the talk of cryptocurrency and NFTs. Square was about to go pretty deep into it. Konami started doing NFTs. I forgot what other companies were as well, but Square Enix was definitely talking about getting into NFTs at the time too. Which when they sold those studios, I think they even said a reason was to build up their blockchain and NFT stuff as well, and to get that running. So there was that as well with that, which they then, I think a couple months later, had to pull back on because of the problems NFTs were having. This could be one of two things, I think, as the reason why they sold these studios. One is general incompetence. and just a poor job of managing these companies underneath Square Enix. That to lead to not only sell those studios, but to sell them as cheaply as they did is just. I shook my head when I heard that because I didn't believe it at the time. I think we were on the phone when we found out, and we're like, "There's no way that they sold those for $300." I'm like, "Oh my god, they did!" It's like I couldn't believe it. But it's either like just general incompetence, or the other thing that was being talked about is that they're trying to sell the Sony, and in order to sell the Sony, they had to make the Square Enix a lot leaner. And one way of doing that was to get rid of some of the studios. Now, the closing down the studios was not going to be a good idea for PR reasons, and just that you are now assuming that debt as soon as you close them down. So the other option was to sell them off, which I guess the Sony thing makes a little more sense. But now that Sony has been trying to fight Microsoft in getting Activision Blizzard, I think Sony has now shied away from acquiring other studios for the time being. So that leaves really Square Enix in kind of a bind right now, I think. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, especially if they were trying to lean themselves out and hope that Sony would just go ahead and pick them up and everything. Then, yeah, just with Sony saying, yeah, we're gonna hold off on doing any sort of major purchases. Yeah, this definitely puts Square Enix in a bit of a pickle, in my opinion, because at that point it's just like, okay, so what do we do in the meantime until Sony gets into a buying mood? What do we do? And it's just kind of interesting, especially since the last quarterly financial report that Square Enix has released, they still have mentioned that, hey, we're still on board with NFTs because we think blockchain is the future and everything. So,
oh god,
I'm just like, oh no, please no. This is just kind of an interesting sort of situation right now, but just who knows? Maybe they get something going on that want to revisit some stuff. I honestly just don't have much of a clue.
Yeah. So let's expand a little bit outwards. What do you think is going to happen with Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal in the next few years?
As long as they release games that sell consistently or well, then they may end up being able to branch out their wings and do the stuff that they and their fans have wanted them to do. One of the big things that everyone's been asking for has been, hey, we would love a good remaster of Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver and just the Legacy of Kain series in general, or even hell, a full-out remake. So that's been one project that's been floated around. People have been asking for more Deus Ex because sweet Deus Ex lore. And I believe that under the Embracer management, they did just announce, hey, we've got a Deus Ex game that is currently in the planning and development stages. We don't have enough to talk about it yet, so we'll get back to you when we get back to you. I know Hitman technically doesn't count because that was IO Interactive, even though they're technically under the Embracer umbrella now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think overall it just sounds like that they will be able to sort of realize the projects that they've wanted to do under Embracer's management, because Embracer seems like they're generally pretty good with studios that do sell consistently or beat expectations, that they let them kind of have free reign to do whatever the hell they want. It isn't until a studio fucks up and does something bad or sells poorly that Embracer maybe pulls back and says, hey, maybe we should have you slow your roll and shift you around to somewhere else. And a great example of that is Volition and Saints Row, the reboot, which that one sold poorly, and it was recently announced that Embracer was going to reroute the Volition team to be a support studio for Gearbox.
Yes.
So, yeah, just as long as, to borrow a phrase from James May from Top Gear, as long as they don't cock it up, I think they'll be fine.
Yeah. So Crystal Dynamics is working on Perfect Dark with Microsoft right now. So they are busy, but Crystal Dynamics is also a big studio, so they can afford to have, I guess, some of their members working on other projects. I think I think they pretty much have just said they're working on Legacy of Kain right now. So, and specifically something with Soul Reaver. So there's that as well. There's definitely gonna be another Deus Ex unless Eidos has something that they think is much more worth our time. So I think those are coming back. It looks like with Embracer, those might be one of the crown jewel those both might be crown jewel studios that they will want to put in as much money as possible for them to make those games and to make them well. So I think we may not hear from them in the next couple of years, but when we do, it will be something that will be pretty big, I think, at least. Thank you for listening to this podcast segment. The Capital Games podcast is done every week, and we post it on all your favorite podcast apps, as well as segments on YouTube. If you want to listen to another segment, you can listen to a new one right there on the screen. We also do a movie podcast called the Capital Games Movie Club. If you'd like, you can go ahead and click on that and see all the movies that we have reviewed from that point. Thank you for listening, and we hope to hear from you soon.